The ship did suffer damage to her mast and sailed into a Swedish port for repairs. A week later, she was back at sea. In March 1962, the Swedish government introduced a new law to outlaw offshore broadcasting, which came into the English coast. Merchants, their ship was run when it came up for sale. The ship anchored off Malmö in Sweden and started broadcasting at Radio Skues on the 2nd of March. When Sweden's anti-pirate law became effective,
Even kijken of deze microfoons hard genoeg zijn. Kunnen we zien wat er stil zijn in de zaal? Well, we have here one of Do you ask the question yourself or shall I do it?
No, okay. No. I asked the question, you answered.
Okay, I could try it. Well, we do this interview in English, of course, due to the fact that Skues is coming from England, and why you have listened to the offshore radio station through the years. It shouldn't be a problem to translate it yourself upstairs in your mind. 55 years of age, born in a little village called Timberley, Cheshire. Early ambition to be an announcer. In love with the crystal set, listening to the radio of the stars, Radio Luxembourg. Then thinking on the fact that you could earn a lot of money in radio. Please, Skues.
Well, Hans, dank u. I'm going to say a bit of this in Dutch, I think. Goedemiddag, Danish, and Kieran. That's about the total bit of my Dutch, except the rude stuff I learned on Radio Caroline. But Hans, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. A great honour and a delight to be here in Utrecht this morning. I've come literally from Norwich in England, which is in Norfolk, where I was broadcasting until the very early hours of this morning. Went straight to the airport to get on the aeroplane, or wait for the first aeroplane to come out at 5:30 this morning, and here we are. So if I'm sounding very tired, please forgive me, and do wake me up, Hans, if I don't answer any of these questions. Where have you compiled all? It's got a questionnaire here that's about 8 yards long.
Well, let's try to start with the first question. I talked earlier about that you're thinking on the fact that you can earn a lot of money in the radio. Was it just a dream or became it reality?
Well, when I was at school, I wanted to be a radio announcer, as many of the people in this room did. Although I'm probably a little bit older than some of the people in this room, and most of my colleagues at school in England didn't want to be disc jockeys or radio announcers. In fact, there weren't any disc jockeys those days. They wanted to be train drivers, but I wanted to be a radio announcer. I didn't think at that time you could make a lot of money, but certainly when disc jockeying began on BBC and Radio Luxembourg, disc jockeys there earned quite a lot of money. But I didn't do it for the money. In fact, when I joined Radio Caroline, which was much later in my life, I was earning the equivalent, I don't know how many guilders this was, but it was the equivalent of £12 a week.
Not too much. Wasn't it the crystal TV set you first appeared on instead of radio?
I didn't actually appear on it. At school, I wanted to learn about radio. Nowadays, at colleges and at universities, you can learn about radio, part of the curriculum, but those days we couldn't. I had to learn the subject of Latin, the language Latin. It'd be nice when they get these microphones fixed, won't it? I learned Latin at school, not because it was going to be useful. See me? 3, 4, 5. Is that better? Right. In time. Right, we'll start again on the top. Hans was asking me about, did I appear on a crystal set? 6 points if you break the glass. 12 points if you can put it together again. 20 points if you can drink out of it when you put it together again after you've broken it. I didn't actually appear on the crystal set. No, I wanted, when I was at school, to learn how to build radio sets. So I wanted to be a technical person. So the first radio I ever built was a crystal set made of a germanium diode, and this was in 1951, 52. And I used to listen to Radio Luxembourg under the bedclothes at night with a pair of headphones, and that was basically it. And I then wanted to be a disc jockey, but I didn't achieve that until much later, in 1958, when I became an announcer with the English Rundfunk in Köln in Germany, which was the British Forces Network, or as I used to refer to it, the British Nurses Fretwork, which is difficult to translate into Dutch.
How was the equipment on the British station compared to the equipment on the radio ships?
You mean the equipment in British Forces Radio? In British Forces Radio, it's interesting because you were what they call self-op. You played your own records, your own tapes, which the BBC did not do at that time. So you had to learn all the technical side before you actually became a broadcaster. And that was very similar to what you got on the pirate ships. When they get the sound right, it'll be wonderful, but they are taking a bit of a time, aren't they?
You started in Cologne, but after that you went to Kuwait. This was during the first crisis over there.
You've done your homework very good. Yes, I was in the Royal Air Force doing what was called National Service. Do you have that in Holland, National Service?
Yes.
Yeah. We had to do 2 years in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, and I wanted to fly aeroplanes, so I joined the Royal Air Force and ended up as a radio announcer. When I left the Royal Air Force in 1960, I applied for a civilian job with British Forces Network, and they sent me out to Kuwait. And that was the first time that Iraq was going to invade in 1961, so I was the first journalist, broadcaster actually there when that was about to happen. And it was ironic that I should go back 30 years later.
From Kuwait, you went to an African country. Nairobi was the next place.
Yeah, with British Forces Radio, you tended to travel around where forces were stationed. So there were radio stations in Cyprus, Malta, Gibraltar, Hong Kong, Cyprus, Germany, East Africa. And I was very, very lucky to get a 3-year posting to Nairobi, which is a wonderful country in East Africa, but a very turbulent country. There are many incidents that have been over the years, and wherever I went, there seemed to be wars going on or problems, and I ended up more like a war reporter than a disc jockey. Wherever I went, it was Zanzibar, Swaziland, Uganda, Kenya, they all had their uprisings there. People thought it was me that was starting it, but it wasn't. And then I moved to Aden, and then once again there was trouble with the Brad fan fighting, so I thought enough was enough. And I decided then to come back to, or return to England and try and get a job with the BBC, but the BBC didn't want me.
What about this rumours that you ever climbed the Kilimanjaro?
Well, it wasn't a rumour, it was actually true. It's a silly thing to do. I did it for a bet. I don't know, what do you call it in Dutch, a bet? Somebody... Right. Well, somebody came to me and said, "You are very lazy. You disc jockeys, very lazy. All you do is drink and eat and go out with women, and you do no exercise." They plenty of exercise with the women, but they didn't believe that. So they said to me, "We're going out Mount Kilimanjaro. Would you like to come for the walk?" So I said yes, but it was a very long walk. It was Africa's highest mountain, but I took a cine camera with me, and I made a radio program about it as well. So that was 20,000 feet in 1962. I just wanted to get to the top in life.
After this period, you went back to Britain and arrived in the middle of the Beatle shape. Did you apply directly for a job on Caroline?
There are many stories how I got the job on Caroline, and every one of them are true. The real variation on the truth, and you've got to be allowed poetic license, was that I'd returned from Aden, resigned my commission with the forces, and met up with a colleague who was an old school chap and I hadn't seen for many years. We went for a drink, like you do, in London, in the area called Mayfair, very near where Radio Caroline had its headquarters in Chesterfield Gardens. And I was having a drink in the pub with my colleague, and I ordered 2 pints of beer. I remember I just said 2 pints of beer, please. And there was a very tubby gentleman sitting on a stool who turned to me and said, "Hey, do you think you could say that again in English?" And I said, 2 pints of bitter. And he said, "Make it 3 and I'll give you a job." So I bought him a drink and I bought myself into a radio program, almost. His name was Alan Crawford, and he just set up Radio Atlanta, which I didn't know anything about. It was news to me. This was Easter time, 1964. Radio Caroline had just gone on the air, and Radio Atlanta came on the back of it. Eventually, the 2 stations merged, and I joined Radio Caroline South in the summer of 1964.
You were only on the South ship or also on the North ship?
No, purely on the South ship.
So never heard about this crazy Dutch captain who had his own chickens aboard the ship?
I heard about it, but I never actually met the Dutch captain or ate any of the eggs from the chickens.
As I remember, you had an accident as well as an illness on the ship, and you were taken to the shore by lifeboat, or?
The strange thing is, over the history of pirate radio on the English coast, I'm not including the Dutch, on the Belgian coast, there were 36 rescues where the lifeboats came out to rescue people who were ill. I don't know why it is when you go on the boat. I've only been in the hospital, I think, 3 times in my life. One, when I was born, I don't remember anything like that. Second, when I was on Radio Caroline, I smashed my right eye in. In fact, that happened as I came out of the studio. And instead of walking through like we've got here, a central mess where everybody's sitting down and eating and talking, as they're doing today, I decided I'd be a decent chap and go the scenic route out onto the top deck and walk along and go to my cabin that way. But it was a force 9 gale, and this, I don't know what they call it, door thing opened and swung, and rather like I smashed my flipping ear when I came through here today. I'm just accident prone with pirates. So that landed me in hospital for 2 weeks, and I actually lost the sight of my eye, but unfortunately I got it back, touch wood. So I thought, well, enough is enough. I then joined Radio Luxembourg, but no sooner had I joined Luxembourg than I was headhunted to go to Radio London. I had a wonderful time on Big L, Radio London, and below me, I was whipped into hospital again, this time with appendicitis. You listening? It just leaves me to talk, you know. I'm not accustomed to talking. And I ended up with appendicitis this time. In fact, 2 days ago, I returned to the hospital where I had my appendix out.
Was it still there?
The appendix wasn't there, but the hospital is.
Ik heb een verzoek voor iedereen achter in de zaal. Zou u misschien rustig kunnen zijn, want er zijn een heleboel mensen die graag willen luisteren. Keith, what were the working conditions on the Caroline ship? The working conditions.
The working conditions on Radio Caroline were very cramped. Certainly if you wanted to relax and write letters and things, you didn't have your own cabin, and you certainly didn't have your own room. So you tended to write letters in the main record library where there was a table, or in the central mess where you had English, American, Australian, New Zealand disc jockeys, and the Dutch crew. And the Dutch captain, although the Dutch captain tended to not come down and mix with us. He had his own cabin, etc., in his own quarters. So we were terribly, terribly cramped. The studio was like any other studio, but in those days we didn't have high tech, so we had to have a lot of tape recorders. I think there were 4 or 5 tape machines in the studio. And those were there to play the adverts in those days, and also when it got very rough, the weather, and although the turntables were stabilised, records did jump around, so sometimes when it became force 10, we had to take the records off and put on, continuous music actually on tape. But the studio's seen many changes over the years, from 1964 right through to 1990, over the relationships. Going on to Radio London, that was... Am I interrupting you, chaps? I'll go and come back again at 4 o'clock, if you like.
This is the screen I told you earlier about. We didn't arrive in time.
Oh, right. Good. Well, I haven't arrived yet. I'm still at the airport. This is just a figment of my imagination.
Well, go on with the story about the galaxy.
What's going to happen on this screen anyway?
Well, we wanted to try to play videotape later.
Oh, right.
It's a wonderful one about Radio London.
Excellent. So, your next question.
What were the working conditions on the Galaxy?
Galaxy was much more relaxed, much larger. It's almost twice the size of the Radio Caroline. The Amiga was 480 times the MV Galaxy, which was a former minesweeper of the United States ship. Density, which had been in the Second World War off Japan, Okinawa. That was much larger. It was just less than 1,000 tons. And we all, as disc jockeys, had our own individual cabins there, and it was a much larger ship, much more relaxed, and much more professionally run, I have to say that. Radio London, in my humble opinion, was the most professional of the pirates circa 1964-1967. It's a very tight format. Caroline was free and easy. You could play what you liked on Caroline, but London, you didn't have any say at all in the choice of music. There was a playlist for you. It was given to you. You had to stick with it. You didn't talk a lot. You played a lot of music, and you stuck to the format. And the main selling point of Radio London in those days were the jingles. Wonderful jingles made by Pams of America, which Caroline did not have.
Caroline later stole some jingles from other offshore radio stations, of course.
Caroline stole jingles? Yeah, they stole them, I think, from Britain Radio and Radio England, because there was a wonderful occasion where they were so proud. The people who were running Radio England, Britain Radio, had in fact been involved in Radio London the very first time, but they'd been pushed out, as it were, and they brought the Brits in instead of the Americans. So the Americans said, we'll run it our way, we'll set up our own ship. So they did. And they were so proud that they went to Pams and got these jingles, and they played them over the air with lots of gaps in between the jingles. And Radio Caroline, being Radio Caroline, recorded absolutely everything off the radio and reworked them and put Radio Caroline in instead of Swinging Radio England. The result, Britain Radio and Swinging Radio England had to go back and get another set of jingles after that.
Isn't it so that you were on another station between the period on Caroline and Radio London?
Was that another pirate station?
Oh, Luxembourg.
Oh yeah, I worked for Luxembourg for just under 6 months. I did the CBS show, which was recorded in London, although I wanted to go to Luxembourg to see the Grand Duchy, and I had quite a few colleagues over there. Beautiful country. So I opted to do 3 months in Luxembourg itself, and 3 months on tape for CBS. Then I was asked to join Radio London after that.
Were you involved in the UKGM project?
UKGM was going to be the good music side of Radio London. I mean, it's a long time ago. This was 1967. And Radio London wanted to split. It was a very successful format, but they also saw another station that was based on a group of forts in the Thames Estuary called Radio 390, getting a huge listening audience, many millions of people tuning into good music. So Radio London thought, we can do an American format with British good music, well, American singers as well. So that was going to be set up on the Radio City forts. And Philip Birch, the organiser of that, invited Duncan Johnson to be the programme controller and myself to be the senior announcer for that setup. And we went and had a look at Radio City, which was diabolical. I mean, I've heard of slums, but it was I could never live in those conditions, but it fell apart, unfortunately. It never happened because at a similar time there was a bit of skullduggery going on, which we didn't know about at the time, where Reg Calvert, who used to own Radio City, and in fact I travelled out with him and Duncan Johnson and some of the Radio London people to go and have a look at Radio City 4 days before he was actually shot dead, which is staggering when I look back. We went to have a look at the fort, and we thought, well, we could do something with it. Philip Birch did not know at that time that Reg Calvert owed money to Radio Caroline for the transmitter, and there's a lot of wheeling and dealing between Caroline and London. Philip Birch pulled out of the deal, rightly so, and said, no, we don't want to go ahead with it. And then Calvert threatened Oliver Smedley, who was a Liberal Member of Parliament in Britain, Major Oliver Smedley, a wartime Army Major, and went down to his house in Saffron Walden to have a go at him. And being an ex-Army Major, Major Smedley pulled the gun and shot Calvert dead. And that, really, regrettably, sounded the death knell to British pirate radio within hours of that happening in June 1966. And the ironic thing was that I'd been out, met Calvert, come back to Radio London, and the first news bulletin I read on that date in June 1966 was the death of Reg Calvert. I was actually gobsmacked that that had happened. But government, British government said, here we go, pirates being pirates, killing each other, we can't have it. So the Marine Offences Broadcasting Bill was very much speeded up, and that was put through Parliament in a matter of months. So as soon as that happened, we knew it's goodbye pirate radio. Sadly, you can't go around killing people, it's not the thing to do.
Ik heb nogmaals een verzoek voor de mensen achter in de zaal. Heel veel mensen zijn speciaal voor Skues gekomen. Wil u alsjeblieft ophouden met het praten? The next question, Kees, is ever had any problems with the customs?
Not with the customs, not problems as such. When I first went out there in 1964, my very first trip to Radio Caroline was with a disc jockey called Teddy Blackburn, and another disc jockey called Keith Martin, a British, American, called Doug Carr. He might have been Canadian actually, Doug Carr, and on the ship were Simon D and one or two others. But we had to go through customs, immigration and all that huge amount of paperwork. We had a liaison officer called Percy Scadden, or Bill Scadden, who was an ex-Metropolitan Police officer. So we didn't really have any problems there, but we were threatened, or not threatened, that's the wrong word. It was tactfully suggested to us by our agents in Harwich that you don't take anything out of any drugs, any booze, any cigarettes, any rude ladies, because you might get your collar felt, which is an English expression, we'll arrest you when you come back into the country. So I didn't have any problems, but a lot of people did, including a member of the royal family, who is now known as the Duke of Gloucester. I had the most embarrassing time of my life as far as Caroline was concerned. I was on shore leave in 1966 and I got a phone call to say, you've got an extra day's holiday, can you go back to the ship on Tuesday rather than the Monday, and we'd like you to take some guests out to the Radio Caroline ship. They're from the University of Cambridge, they're studying architecture. And I said, yeah, sure, not a problem. So I got to Harwich, met the liaison officer, and they said, 3 architects over there. 2 of them introduced themselves fully, and the other chap just said his name was Richard. And they were writing an article for a magazine called Granter. So I took them out to the ship. We exchanged sort of ships, if you like, the group, the DJs that were coming off the ship. I was doing the lunch here, so I went on the air straight away and introduced these 3 people on air. What I didn't know, which proves I'm really thick, was that I introduced this chap Richard. I said, don't you have a surname then? So he said, no, I'm just named as Richard, and left it at that. And I didn't know who he was at all. After they'd left and gone back on the tender to Harwich, the captain came to me and said, do you know who that was you've just been interviewing? So I said, well, there were 3 university students from Cambridge. And he said, look, and he showed me the signature, which said, Prince Richard of Gloucester. And I said, yeah, and I'm the Queen of Spain. If you believe that, you can knit fog. I still didn't believe it. Of course, when you're on a radio ship, as we were there, we didn't have any communication with shore. We didn't see any newspapers for 2 or 3 days. What happened, and this is a long-winded way of getting around to what Hans asked about the customs, those 3 university undergraduates went back to customs in Harwich, and a very keen customs officer took one look at this chap called Richard and said, excuse me, have a look at your passport. Looked at his passport, which, I don't know, members of the royal family have a slightly different passport or something. He said, are you English or what? And he said, I'm 9th in succession to the throne. What is your name? And that customs officer was removed, I believe, fairly quickly. And the newspapers picked up the story. It was banner headlines in Great Britain about this, like a royal member of the royal family going out to the ship. Prince Richard didn't want any publicity, but he got it. That's why he didn't mention his name to us, because had we known who he was, he would have had the red carpet, and that's what he did not want.
Was it difficult to live together with this Dutch crewman aboard the ships?
No. Sadly, I'm not in touch with any of the Dutch crew now. I did for a while keep in touch with the captain of Radio London, Captain Bruniger, who was a most remarkable man. Very tremendous career he had behind him. But the Dutch cooks, the engineers, we all got on it incredibly well. In fact, I think probably I learned how to drink quite hard. They taught me an awful lot. I mean, had I been on the ship now, I would have got through 20 of these. They were hard drinking, but great fun. And I've used one of the drawings of a Dutch, he was a carpenter who drew me a plan of Radio London, but I had great fondness, and still do have a great fondness for those Dutch members. I'd love to know where they all are today. I tried to track down Captain Bill Vernigo, but he died sadly a couple of years ago, which is a great pity. And I heard from his son, so I wanted to include him in the book and do a sort of biography of him. And his son wrote back and said, I'm sorry, you just missed it. He died a couple of weeks ago. It's a great pity, but we all get older. I was in my 20s when I was on Caroline in London, and here I am now in my 90s. Or is it my 50s?
What about the girls on the ship?
Pardon?
Were there any girls on the ship?
You wouldn't expect me to answer that, honestly, would you? There weren't. I actually have a cine film that I made myself by this gentleman, although this is video. I took an 8mm cine film when I was on Radio Caroline when I first went out there. And there were 2 ladies on the ship, and I was a bit gobsmacked. There were the 2 girls, one called Mary and one called Maureen, both Australian, and they were supposedly, quote, what did they say? They were indexing records in the record library. The News of the World newspaper got hold of the story, and the girls were very swiftly called back to London. So after that, there were no girls, sadly, on the ship during 1964-67. Periodically, you get visitors coming out to the ship. There was a girl singer called Sylvan, who was stormbound. She was actually being interviewed on the radio, and she'd come out on the tender in the morning from Harwich, and she was due to go back on the same tender after lunch when she was being interviewed. A storm suddenly developed, we are told, and the tender left, and Sylvan was left to the mercy of all those disc jockeys, engineers, and Dutch crew. Whatever happened to Sylvan?
What about the on-land gigs, kids ashore?
Yeah, you were talking about money earlier on. When I first joined Caroline, I was earning £12 a week, which wasn't a lot of money. You got it in cash. So when we came off the ship, we worked for 2 weeks on the ship, and then we had a week's holiday. So they used to give you £36 in cash as you came ashore. But then you had the choice of doing one of 2 things. One, you could go back to London and go back to Caroline House or Radio London, Big L office, where they would give you lots
of some records banned on the radio during that period.
Give me a for instance.
On the 40s, coming to take it away.
Well, I think that might have been banned on Caroline. I think London played it, because I certainly remember it. I'm certainly put it in my collection at home. It may have been banned. I mean, it's not something that's fresh in my mind that particular record was banned or for whatever reason. I mean, I have played it subsequently. I've even played it on the BBC. At the end, when I finished a series, I said they're going to take me away with the white coat and all the rest of it.
What about the connection between the pirates and the music business?
What, now or then? Then, well, unofficially, I think we had a good relationship with the record companies and the music publishers and the music industry generally. Officially, they didn't recognise us. Radio Caroline offered to pay. There are two copyright bodies in Britain. I don't know what the problem is in Holland. We have what is called the Performing Rights Society, where you've got to pay music copyright fees to those who write the songs and those who publish the songs. Then you've got another copyright body, magic initials again, called the PPL, Phonographic Performance Limited. So they're all hands in the till wanting money. And radio stations today, all the legal ones, have to pay those copyright fees, and they're astronomical. The pirates offered to pay performing rights. Radio Caroline and Radio London were both accepted by performing rights, that they paid money. I don't think it's the full fee, but they at least made the offer. The Phonographic Performance Limited said we cannot accept money from illegal organisations. They would not allow us because they thought at the time that we were spoiling the sales of records. The fact that Jonathan King singing Everyone's Gone to the Moon, or Davey Dozy Beaky McIntosh singing Hold Tight was being played maybe 10 times a day on radio, which had never been heard before. They thought that sales were suffering because of that. So there was that problem that they wouldn't accept us, but secretly, you know, we would have a drink with the record companies and you would find maybe 4 or 5 copies of a brand new record would be in your pocket or in your briefcase before you return to the ship. So officially, no, they didn't recognise us. Unofficially, I think those people who were the pluggers would have got sacked had they not serviced the ships.
You did leave the offshore radio world before August the 14th. Why was that?
I left before August 14th. Yes. Some people call me scam for leaving before August the 14th. My ambition had always to be, many years before, to work for the BBC as an announcer. I'd worked for Forces Radio, I'd done Family Favourites, which was a programme which was heard on BBC, but I never had a job for them, and they turned me down in 1964, so I joined the Pirates. Come 1967, when the Marine Offences Broadcasting Bill was going through Parliament, and I was a Jekyll and Hyde because I was a disc jockey on Radio Caroline and Radio London during my 2 weeks at sea. And on my week off, I'd go and sit in the House of Commons in Parliament and listen to what was happening. So I knew that pirate radio was going to be done away with, and anybody who was British, we could go to jail. So a number of us were invited to do auditions for BBC National Radio, which was going to replace the Pirates. So I was offered a job there, a very lucrative job, doing a program called Saturday Club. So I would have been an idiot, I think, to have said no. Looking back in hindsight, you know, I certainly admire and respect those who carried on Caroline, like Johnny Walker and Robbie Dale and the others, whereas some of us did join the BBC and